One of the most well-known passages in the Bible is John chapter 3 verse 60. It says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believed in him should not perish, but have everlasting life." But very few of us know what it means, what the Bible means when it says only begotten Son. What does it mean to be the Son of God? Does that mean that Jesus had a mother? Does that mean that Jesus somehow was birthed from God, that somehow he came from God? You know, in our understanding of things here on earth, we have this idea called a metaphor. And a metaphor is a method of describing something that helps us to understand some characteristics of that thing. So for example, if I had to say, I flew to work in my car. If I say I flew to work in my car, I don't actually mean that I flew to work in my car. But what I really might be meaning is that I got there very quickly. I don't mean to say that my car has wings or that it lifted off the tar road. But what I mean is that it went there very fast. Now there's the reality, and then there's the metaphor. The reality is an airplane. Okay, I'm taking some things from the reality of an airplane which flies, and I'm applying that to my car. I'm saying that my airplane, my car flew, but I don't mean that it actually lifted up from the ground like a airplane does. But I mean that it goes very fast. It goes as fast as, well, not even as fast, but that it goes very fast, like an airplane goes very fast. So there's the reality, the airplane, and then there is the metaphor, me taking some of the things that describe an airplane, applying that to my car or to the situation, and saying that this is what happened. And it's very important for us to distinguish between the reality and the metaphor. Now, in our language, the word son is a metaphor, I believe, for a real thing that exists in heaven. In our terms, the word son applies to a biological relationship between perhaps a father and his child. We mean that this child came from the union between a husband and his wife and was birthed by the wife. Now that is what it means in our language to be a son. It means to be born of a woman. But I believe that to be a metaphor of something more real that happens in heaven, or that is understood in heaven. I believe that in heaven the word son means something completely different. Psalm chapter 2 verse 7 says, "I will declare the decree. The Lord hath said unto me, Thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee." And this is God speaking about Jesus. He says, "Thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee." And the question we need to ask is, when did this conversation take place? When did God say to Jesus, "Thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee"? Hebrews 1 verse 5 says, "For unto which of the angels said he at any time, Thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee? And again, I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son." And I'd like you especially to take note of the tense in this verse. It says, "Thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee. And again, I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son." So, if we just take a step back, it wasn't always the case where Jesus was the Son of God. It was not always the case where God was the Father of Jesus, because this verse clearly says that I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son. And when we take that back to Psalm 2 verse 7, it says, "Thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee." So there was a certain time where Jesus became the Son of God, even though he was called the Son of God way back into eternity. Acts chapter 13 verse 30 to 33 says, "But God raised him," that's raising Jesus, "from the dead," verse 31, "and he was seen many days of them which came up with him from Galilee to Jerusalem, who are witnesses unto the people, and we declare unto you glad tidings, how that the promise which was made unto the fathers," verse 33, "God hath fulfilled the same unto us their children, in that he raised up Jesus again, as it is also written in the second Psalm, Thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee." And so we see that Paul speaking here quotes from Psalms chapter 2. He says from the second Psalm, it says, "Thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee." And he is equating this with Jesus being raised from the dead. He says that God has fulfilled his promise to us in Jesus being raised from the dead. And he's saying that And this was prophesied in Psalm chapter 2, where it says, "Thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee." And so we see, where does this conversation take place? Where did God say to Jesus? Where did the Father say to Jesus, "Thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee"? It's clearly at the resurrection. So when Jesus was resurrected from the dead, he became the Son of God. God became his Father. And so there's this connection between being a son and being raised from the dead. We see this connection as well in Hebrews chapter 11, when the faith of Abraham is described. Hebrews chapter 11 verse 17 to 19 says, "By faith Abraham, when he was tried, offered up Isaac. And he that had received the promises offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said that in Isaac shall thy seed be called, accounting that God was able to raise him up, even from the dead, from whence also he received him in a figure." Now we know that Isaac was not the only son of Abraham. Abraham had also another son, Ishmael, who we had from Sarah's maid a few years before Isaac was even born. But it says that Abraham offered up his only begotten son. Why is he the only begotten son? Because of whom it was said that in Isaac shall thy seed be called. And it says that he accounted that God was able to raise him up from the dead, from whence also he received him in a figure. So in two ways, Abraham received Isaac from the dead. In the first way was that Isaac had been very old and he thought that he would never get a son. And so in one sense, he received Isaac from the dead, because it was almost as if he was not able to have kids. And then in a second sense, he received Isaac from the dead because, God had said to him, "Go sacrifice your son Isaac." And he thought to himself that, God would be able to raise him up from the dead. And so when God told Abraham, don't lay your hand on the boy, it's fine, I have tested your faith now. It was also almost as if Isaac was being received by Abraham from the dead. And so we see that in the Bible, we see that with Jesus and with Abraham and Isaac, there is this connection between the name son, or only begotten son, and being raised from the dead. And so, we could sort of bring this to our level and say, in heaven, being a son means to be raised from the dead. In our sense, we use a metaphor, and so not all things of the metaphor apply, of course. Just like my car doesn't lift off from the ground when I say it flies. In fact, it does other things that an airplane does not do. It can drive at certain speeds. I can turn very left and right very, very easily. It's more agile. So there's certain things about my car that the plane does not have. But there are definitely things that I'm describing my car to have that are only in the airplane. Like when I'm saying my car flew. And in the same sense as well, Son of God in heaven's terms means to be born, or means to be raised from the dead. And in our term, it means to be born of woman. There are certain things that are similar. We could say that my child never existed before, but now they exist. That sort of is like being raised from the dead. But it's not exactly the same as the reality that exists in heaven of this idea of son meaning being raised from the dead. And so when the Bible refers to Jesus as the Son of God, or the only begotten Son of God, it has nothing to do with Jesus' origin. Jesus had always been with God from the beginning, or throughout eternity. So it has nothing to do with Jesus' origin, as if he had a mother. But rather that one day Jesus would die and be raised from the dead in order to defeat this enemy, this great enemy called sin. So the name Son of God has to do with the foreknowledge of God. In other words, God knew long before we even existed that sin would arrive on this planet, and that Jesus would have to die and be raised from the dead. And therefore he attributed this name Son of God to Jesus through time eternal, because he knew that this would happen. So for as long as there has been a God, for as long as there has been God, which is eternity, there has been the solution to the sin problem. Jesus has forever been called the Son of God. Why? Because God always knew that sin would arrive on earth, and that he would have to put in place this intricate solution, this intricate plan to eradicate sin from the universe, and that would involve Jesus dying and being raised from the dead. And this truly was the mystery that was hidden for ages past and for generations, but has now been revealed to us, to his saints, says Paul.